What is active versus passive voice in journalism copy editing? Imagine reading a news story that feels lively and easy to follow, then another that sounds vague and confusing. The difference often comes down to how sentences are built. In journalism copy editing, active voice and passive voice are two ways to structure sentences based on who is doing what. Active voice is when the subject of the sentence performs the action directly. For example, the journalist wrote the article. Here, the journalist is doing the writing, making the sentence clear and straightforward. This style is preferred in news writing because it keeps the story direct, easy to understand, and quick to read. Passive voice happens when the subject receives the action instead of doing it. For example, the article was written by the journalist. Now, the focus is on the article, not the person who wrote it. The sentence becomes longer and sometimes more complicated. Passive voice can make sentences seem vague or less impactful, which is why editors usually avoid it in news stories. However, passive voice isn't always wrong. Sometimes, it is useful when the doer of the action is unknown, unimportant, or better left out. For example, mistakes were made is passive and avoids pointing fingers. It can also be used to emphasize the result or the object rather than the person responsible. In copy editing, the goal is often to change passive sentences into active ones to improve clarity and engagement. For example, changing "the decision was made by the committee" to "the committee made the decision" makes the sentence clearer and more direct. Editors also look for ways to simplify language, cut unnecessary words, and make sentences shorter. Active voice naturally helps with this because it tends to be more concise. Knowing when to use active or passive voice helps journalists write stories that are both clear and nuanced. Active voice makes news more dynamic and easier to follow, while passive voice can be useful for maintaining objectivity or focusing on the action rather than the actor. In summary, active voice puts the doer front and center, making sentences punchier and easier to understand. Passive voice shifts the focus to the receiver of the action, which can be helpful in certain situations. Good copy editing balances these choices to produce stories that are engaging, accurate, and easy to read.